The blistering Texas sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky as Clara Vance squinted at the horizon, her parched lips cracking as she whispered a desperate prayer. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving terrain of southern Texas had become both her salvation and potential grave as she pushed forward on foot, her water canteen long since emptied. Clara had been traveling for 3 days since her stagecoach was ambushed outside Lerdo. The other passengers had been taken captive by bandits, but she'd managed to slip away in the chaos, clutching only her small satchel containing her life savings and the deed to her late uncle's property near Brownsville. Now, with each labored step, the 24-year-old schoolteacher from Boston questioned if freedom had been worth the price she might pay. Her vision began to blur, dark spots dancing before her eyes as her knees finally buckled beneath her. Clara collapsed onto the sun-baked earth, her body no longer able to withstand the brutal combination of heat, exhaustion, and thirst. As consciousness began to slip away, she thought she heard the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats approaching, but surely it was just another hallucination brought on by the heat. Colton Layton pulled back on his horse's reins when he spotted the crumpled form on the trail ahead. The 30-year-old cowboy had been making his way back to Brownsville after delivering a herd of cattle to a ranch north of the Rio Grande. Dismounting swiftly, he approached with caution, his hand instinctively hovering near the Colt revolver at his hip. These parts were known for bandits and all manner of trickery. "Madam," he called out, his voice rough from the trail dust. When she didn't respond, he knelt beside her and gently turned her over. Her face was flushed with heat, skin hot to the touch. She was alive, but in a bad way. Colton looked around, assessing his surroundings. They were still a good day's ride from Brownsville, and the woman clearly couldn't travel in this condition. Making a quick decision, he lifted her carefully and carried her to a small grove of mesquite trees about 50 yards off the main trail. There was a shallow creek nearby, not much water this time of year, but enough. With practiced efficiency, Colton made camp, first laying out his bedroll in the shade for the unconscious woman. He gathered wood for a fire, unsaddled his horse, and fetched water from the creek. As the sun began to set, he dampened his bandana and gently wiped the trail dust from the woman's face and hands, then tipped his canteen to her lips, letting a small amount of water trickle into her mouth. Clara stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to meet the concerned gaze of a stranger. Instinctively, she tried to scramble away. "Easy now," the man said, his voice deep but gentle. "You're safe. I found you collapsed on the trail." Who are you?" Clara managed to croak, her throat painfully dry. "Name's Colton Layton. Most folks just call me Colt." He offered the canteen again. "Small sips now. Too much too fast will make you sick." Clara accepted the water gratefully, forcing herself to drink slowly despite her desperate thirst. As her senses gradually returned, she became increasingly aware of her surroundings and the man who had apparently saved her life. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of weathered sage. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges of his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: denim trousers, a faded shirt, leather vest, and worn boots, all covered with the dust of the trail. "Thank you," she said after a moment, her voice slightly stronger. "I'm Clara Vance." Colton nodded, turning to tend the small fire he'd built. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Vance. What brings you out here alone?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. But he had saved her life, and there was something in his steady gaze that inspired trust. "I was on the Lerdo stagecoach. We were attacked by bandits 3 days ago. I managed to escape, but..." She glanced down at her torn dress and battered boots. "I've been walking ever since, trying to reach Brownsville." Colton's expression darkened. "The Cortez gang, most likely. They've been hitting stagecoaches all across this stretch lately." He added another small branch to the fire. "Brownsville, you say? That's where I'm headed myself." "My uncle lived there," Clara explained. "He passed away last month and left me his property. I was coming to see it, to start a new life." The reality of how close she'd come to dying in the attempt hit her suddenly, and she struggled to maintain her composure. Colton noticed her distress and busied himself with preparing a simple meal of beans and jerky, giving her a moment to collect herself. "You need to rest, Miss Vance. We're still a full day's ride from town and you're in no condition to travel tonight. But I can't impose. It's no imposition." "I was planning to make camp anyway." As the food warmed over the fire, he glanced at her with a hint of a smile. "Rest, I'll keep watch." There was something in the way he said it, a simple promise, delivered without flourish but with absolute certainty, that made Clara feel truly safe for the first time in days. She nodded, settling back onto the bedroll. "Thank you, Mr. Layton. Just Colt is fine." As they shared the meager but satisfying meal, Clara learned that Colton had been working as a ranch hand and occasional cattle driver since he was 17. Originally from Missouri, he'd come to Texas after the war, seeking a fresh start away from the bitter divisions that had torn his family apart, his father having fought for the Union while his older brothers joined the Confederate cause. "And now?" Clara asked, sipping the strong coffee he'd brewed. Colton stared into the fire. "Now I've saved enough to buy a small spread of my own, nothing fancy, just a few acres with good water access west of Brownsville, closing the deal next week if all goes well." Clara smiled. "It seems we're both starting new chapters." "Seems so." He glanced at her curiously. "What about you? Teaching school in Boston doesn't exactly prepare a person for the Texas borderlands." "Perhaps not," Clara admitted, "but I've always been more adaptable than people give me credit for." "My uncle's letters described a growing town in need of education and refinement. He left me his house and a small plot of land. It's not much, but it's a chance to build something of my own." Colton nodded, understanding in his eyes. Independence is worth a fair bit out here. As night fully descended, the temperature dropped sharply, a stark contrast to the day's heat. Clara shivered despite the fire's warmth. "Here," Colton said, retrieving a wool blanket from his saddlebags. "Nights get cold in these parts." As he draped the blanket around her shoulders, their fingers brushed briefly, and Clara felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She quickly attributed it to her weakened condition and the strange circumstances. "You should sleep," he said, moving back to his side of the fire. "We've got a long ride tomorrow if you're feeling up to it." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch for a spell. Get some rest, Miss Vance." Clara wanted to insist he rest as well, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her again. As she lay down on the bedroll, she found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the watchful eyes that scanned the darkness surrounding their small camp. There was something undeniably reassuring about his presence. "Good night, Colt," she murmured, sleep already pulling at her. "Good night, Miss Vance." Clara drifted off to the comforting sounds of the crackling fire and Colton's occasional soft words to his horse as he tended to the animal. Sometime in the night, Clara awoke to the sound of coyotes howling in the distance. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Colton, sitting alert with his rifle across his knees, his eyes still scanning the darkness, and remembered. He had been true to his word. He was keeping watch, as if sensing her gaze, he turned to look at her. "Just some coyotes," he said quietly. "Nothing to worry about." Clara nodded, oddly comforted by his calm presence, and soon fell back into a deep, healing sleep. Morning came with the first streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Clara woke feeling remarkably better, though still weak. Colton had already rekindled the fire and was brewing a fresh pot of coffee. "How are you feeling?" he asked, handing her a tin cup of the strong, black brew. "Much improved, thank you." Clara took a grateful sip, then looked at him more closely. "Did you sleep at all?" he shrugged. "I've gone longer without." But she could see the fatigue in the slight shadows beneath his eyes. "You shouldn't have. I said I'd keep watch," he interrupted simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Clara was beginning to understand that Colton Layton was a man of his word, even at his own expense. After a breakfast of hardtack and the last of the jerky, Colton saddled his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Ranger. "Can you ride?" he asked, eyeing her critically. Clara nodded. I grew up riding in Vermont before we moved to Boston, though it's been some years. You'll ride in front where I can keep you secure. It'll be a long day, but we should reach Brownsville by nightfall if we push on. He helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. Clara suddenly found herself intensely aware of his proximity as his arms came around her to take the reins. She sat stiffly at first, trying to maintain proper distance despite the circumstances. "You'll wear yourself out sitting like that," Colton remarked after the first hour. "Just lean back if you need to. No shame in it after what you've been through." Gradually, as the morning wore on and her strength began to flag again, Clara allowed herself to relax against his solid chest. The steady rhythm of the horse and the warm security of Colton's presence lulled her into a peaceful state somewhere between waking and sleeping. They stopped briefly around midday at a small water hole to rest the horse and eat the last of their provisions. As Clara splashed cool water on her face, she caught Colton watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Just thinking you're remarkably resilient for someone who nearly died of heat exhaustion yesterday." "I told you adaptable," she replied with a small smile. They continued their journey, with Colton occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the area. He had an easy way of talking that never felt forced, and Clara found herself increasingly comfortable in his company. As the afternoon waned, they crested a small rise and Colton reined Ranger to a halt. "There it is," he said, gesturing ahead. "Brownsville." Clara looked with eager anticipation at the town sprawled along the Rio Grande. It was larger than she'd expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a church steeple rising in the distance, and numerous dwellings scattered around the outskirts. "It's grown considerably in the last few years," Colton explained. "The steamboats bring regular trade up the river, and the cattle drives pass nearby on their way north." Clara nodded, trying to envision her future in this dusty border town so far removed from the cobblestone streets of Boston. "My uncle's property is on Cedar Street, according to his letters." "I know it. It's a decent area not far from the school." Colton clicked to Ranger, and they continued down toward the town. As they rode down the main street, Clara was acutely aware of the curious stares they attracted. A woman in a tattered dress riding double with a trail-worn cowboy was bound to cause talk in a town like Brownsville. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but Colton seemed entirely untroubled by the attention. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, where Colton briefly reported the likely stagecoach robbery. Sheriff Daniel Morgan, a gruff man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face, took down the details and promised to send a telegram to the authorities in Lerdo. "Been after Cortez for months," he growled. "Slippery as an eel, that one. Miss Vance, you're lucky to be alive. Most folks who tangle with that gang don't live to tell about it." "I owe my survival to Mr. Layton," Clara said simply. The sheriff eyed Colton with newfound respect. "That's so." "Well, good to know there are still decent men on the trail." He turned back to Clara. "You got someplace to stay, miss. My uncle was Edmund Vance. I've inherited his property." Recognition flashed in the sheriff's eyes. "Old Ed's niece, are you? Good man, your uncle." "Town's not the same without him." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "His place has been closed up since he passed. Might need some attention before it's properly habitable." "I can put Miss Vance up at the boarding house for tonight," Colton offered. "Mrs. Abernathy runs a respectable establishment." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. I'll have my deputy escort you over to Ed's place tomorrow, Miss Vance, help you get settled." After leaving the sheriff's office, they made their way to a modest 2-story building with a sign identifying it as Abernathy's boarding house. Mrs. Abernathy herself, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s, took one look at Clara's bedraggled state and immediately bustled into action. "Goodness gracious, child, you look like you've been through the wars. Come in, come in. I'll have a hot bath drawn for you immediately." She shot Colton an accusatory glance. "Shame on you, Colt Layton, bringing this poor girl into town in such a state." Colton removed his hat, looking uncharacteristically abashed. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Abernathy, but Miss Vance here survived a stagecoach robbery and was in desperate straits when I found her on the trail. I brought her straight to you, knowing you'd take good care of her, Mrs." Abernathy's expression softened at his explanation. "Well, that's different then. You did right, Colt," she turned back to Clara. "Come along, dear, we'll get you sorted out." Clara hesitated, turning back to Colton. "I don't know how to thank you properly for what you've done," he shook his head. "No thanks needed. Any decent person would have done the same." "Not everyone would have kept watch all night," she said softly. A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. "You get some proper rest now, Miss Vance. I expect the deputy will be by for you in the morning." Before she could say more, Mrs. Abernathy was ushering her inside, already talking about clean clothes and hot food and putting some meat back on those bones. Clara glanced back over her shoulder, catching one last glimpse of Colton as he mounted his horse. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them before he tipped his hat and rode away. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be as efficient as she was kind-hearted. Within the hour, Clara found herself soaking in a glorious hot bath, the trail dust and fear of the past days seeming to melt away with the steam. Afterward, she was provided with a simple but clean dress from Mrs. Abernathy's daughter, who was away visiting her sister in San Antonio and wouldn't mind a bit. Over a hearty dinner of beef stew and fresh bread, Clara found herself recounting her ordeal to Mrs. Abernathy and the boarding house's other two residents, Mr. Peterson, an elderly bookkeeper, and Miss Winters, a middle-aged seamstress. "It's a blessing Colt Layton found you," Miss Winters remarked. "He's one of the few genuine gentlemen left in these parts. You know him well?" Clara asked, trying to sound merely conversational. Mrs. Abernathy and Miss Winters exchanged a knowing glance. "Colt's been in Brownsville going on 8 years now," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always ready to lend a hand when needed, works hard, saves his money. Never sees him carousing or gambling like some of the other cowboys. I heard he's buying the old Jensen place," Mr. Peterson added, reaching for another piece of bread. "Got a good price, too. Jensen was eager to head back east after his wife passed. Is it a nice property?" Clara found herself asking. "Decent enough," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Good water rights, which is what matters most out here, needs work, but Colt's not afraid of that." She studied Clara with shrewd eyes. "Your uncle's place is quite nice, though, one of the better houses in town. Edmund built it himself when he first came out here after the war. Added on to it over the years." Clara nodded, feeling a pang of regret that she'd never visited while her uncle was alive. They'd corresponded regularly, but the distance and her teaching obligations had always made the journey seem impractical. Now she wished she'd made the effort. "I never met him," she admitted. "He and my father had a falling out before I was born. They reconciled through letters in recent years, but—" Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand sympathetically. "Edmund spoke of you often, proud as could be of his scholarly niece. He kept every letter you sent him in a box on his mantel." This revelation brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. After her parents' deaths from influenza 3 years earlier, she'd felt increasingly unmoored in Boston. Her uncle's bequest had seemed like a sign, a chance to forge a new path. Now, hearing that he'd treasured their correspondence, she felt more certain than ever that she'd made the right decision in coming. That night, as she lay in a real bed for the first time in days, Clara found her thoughts continually returning to Colton Layton. There was something compelling about the quiet cowboy, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the chaos she'd experienced since the stagecoach robbery. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as she replayed their brief time together in her mind. Eventually, she drifted off with the memory of his voice saying, "Rest, I'll keep watch." The next morning, after a breakfast that Mrs. Abernathy insisted she eat every last bite of, Clara was visited by Deputy Marshal Wilson, a lanky young man with earnest blue eyes who couldn't quite hide his admiration for the new arrival in town. "Sheriff sent me to escort you to your uncle's property, Miss Vance," he explained, fidgeting with his hat. and to help with anything you might need." Clara thanked him, gathered the few belongings she had left her satchel with the property deed and her savings, miraculously intact after her ordeal, and bid farewell to Mrs. Abernathy with a promise to visit soon. "You come by any time, dear," the older woman insisted, pressing a basket of food into her hands. "And tell Colton Layton I expect to see him at Sunday dinner this week. No excuses." Clara blushed at the knowing twinkle in Mrs. Abernathy's eye but nodded her agreement. The walk to Cedar Street took them through the heart of Brownsville. Despite her circumstantial introduction to the town, Clara found herself favorably impressed by what she saw. The main thoroughfare boasted a variety of businesses: a general store, a bank, a hotel, several saloons which she pointedly did not look at too closely, a dressmaker's shop, and even a small bookstore that immediately caught her interest. "Town's growing fast," Deputy Wilson explained proudly. "Railroad's talking about putting in a spur line next year. That'll really put Brownsville on the map." They turned onto Cedar Street, which featured a row of relatively well-maintained houses set back from the road, most with small front gardens protected by picket fences. The deputy led her to a 2-story white clapboard house about halfway down the street. A large oak tree shaded one side of the property, and rose bushes, somewhat neglected but still blooming, lined the front walk. "Here we are," he announced, "the Vance place." Clara stood for a moment, taking in the sight of her inheritance. It was a substantial house by frontier standards, not grand by any means, but solid and well-built, with a covered porch stretching across the front and numerous windows to catch the breeze. It looked welcoming. Deputy Wilson produced a key from his pocket. "Sheriff's been keeping an eye on the place since your uncle passed. Everything should be in order inside, though it might need a good airing out." He unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Clara enter first. The interior was dim with the curtains drawn, but as her eyes adjusted, she could see that the house was comfortably furnished with sturdy, practical pieces. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise it was in good condition. The main floor consisted of a spacious front parlor, a dining room with a large oak table, a well-appointed kitchen with a modern cast-iron stove, and a small study lined with bookshelves. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms and a small sewing room that could easily serve as an additional bedroom if needed. "It's perfect," Clara murmured, running her hand along the banister as they descended the stairs. "Far more than I expected." Deputy Wilson beamed as if he were personally responsible for the house's fine condition. "Your uncle was well respected in Brownsville, Miss Vance, served on the town council for many years, helped establish the school too." "The school?" Clara's interest was immediately piqued. "Is there a teacher currently employed?" The deputy shook his head. "Not since Miss Calloway left to get married last spring. Town's been making do with Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, filling in a few days a week, but it's not ideal. You interested in the position?" "I was a teacher in Boston," Clara explained. "I had hoped to continue my profession here." "Well, that's fortunate indeed," Deputy Wilson exclaimed. "You should speak with Mayor Baldwin as soon as possible. I know he's been seeking a qualified instructor." Clara nodded, her mind already filled with possibilities. The house, a teaching position, everything was falling into place more smoothly than she could have imagined after the harrowing start to her arrival in Texas. The deputy helped her open windows to air out the house, showed her where to find the water pump in the back garden, and pointed out other important features of the property. He was in the middle of explaining how to light the stove when a knock came at the front door, expecting someone. He asked, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Clara shook her head, though a small flutter of hope arose in her chest. The deputy moved cautiously to the door, relaxing visibly when he saw who stood on the porch. "Colt, didn't expect to see you here." Clara's heart gave a peculiar little jump as Colton Layton stepped into the parlor, hat in hand. He looked considerably more presentable than when she'd last seen him, freshly shaved, hair trimmed, wearing a clean shirt and vest. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. "Miss Vance," he finally said, nodding politely. "Thought I'd check and make sure you were settling in all right." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Layton," Clara replied, aware of the deputy's curious gaze shifting between them. Colton held up a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Also brought something that belongs to you, found it in my saddlebag this morning. Clara accepted the package, unwrapping it to find a small leather-bound book, her journal, which she'd thought lost during the stagecoach robbery. My journal. How did you must have fallen from your satchel when I moved you to the camp, he explained. Didn't realize it was yours until I saw the name inside this morning. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. Thank you, it has sentimental value. Deputy Wilson cleared his throat. Well, if everything's in order here, Miss Vance, I should be getting back to my duties. Sheriff wanted me to remind you to come by the office if you remember any additional details about the robbery. Of course. Thank you for your assistance today, Deputy. After the young lawman departed, an awkward silence fell between Clara and Colton. She was suddenly intensely aware of being alone with him in her new home, though the house was wide open to the street with windows and doors ajar for ventilation. It's a fine property, Colton said finally, glancing around the parlor. Your uncle had good taste. So I'm discovering, Clara agreed. I'm still somewhat in shock that it's mine now. She hesitated, then added, Mrs. Abernathy said to tell you she expects you at Sunday dinner this week. No excuses were her exact words. A rare smile transformed Colton's serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Mrs. Abernathy doesn't take no for an answer, been trying to fatten me up for years now. Clara found herself returning his smile. She's very kind. I'm grateful you took me to her boarding house. Best place in town for someone needing care, he agreed. His expression grew more serious. I should let you get settled, just wanted to make sure you were all right after. Everything, I am, thanks to you. Clara took a step closer to him. I never properly thanked you for saving my life, Colt. He looked almost embarrassed by her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true. Clara met his gaze steadily. You could have left me water and directions and continued on your way. You didn't have to make camp and keep watch all night. Colton studied her face for a long moment. No, he said finally. I couldn't have done that. Something in the way he said it made Clara's heart beat faster. Before she could respond, however, he took a step back, placing his hat back on his head. I should go, let you get settled. He paused at the door. Town's having a social on Saturday evening. Welcome for new folks, that sort of thing. Might be a good way for you to meet people. Will you be there? The question slipped out before Clara could reconsider its propriety. A hint of that smile returned. Might be, Mrs. Abernathy usually drags me to these things. He touched the brim of his hat. Good day, Miss Vance. After he left, Clara found herself standing in the doorway, watching his retreating figure until he turned the corner. Only then did she close the door and lean against it, pressing the recovered journal to her chest as an unfamiliar feeling of anticipation blossomed within her. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Clara set about making her uncle's house truly her own. Mrs. Abernathy proved an invaluable ally, helping her hire a local woman named Rosa Martinez to assist with the deep cleaning the house required after months of standing empty. Rosa, a widow in her 40s with a talent for cooking and gardening, quickly became indispensable, not only for her hard work but for her knowledge of the town and its inhabitants. Miss Clara, you must be careful with the young men in town, Rosa warned on her second day as they scrubbed the kitchen together. News of a beautiful new lady from the East has spread fast. Already my nephew Louis says the Cowboys at the Silver Dollar Saloon talk of nothing else. Clara blushed at being described as beautiful but took the warning seriously. I have no interest in saloon cowboys, Rosa. I came here to teach and to build a new life for myself. Rosa's dark eyes twinkled knowingly. See, but sometimes life brings unexpected things, no. Like handsome cowboys who rescue ladies in distress. Clara nearly dropped the pot she was scouring. Mr. Layton was simply being kind. It was a chance encounter. MMM, Rosa hummed noncommittally. My sister's husband works at the livery. He says Senor Colt came in yesterday asking many questions about the best furniture maker in town. Wanted to know who could build a proper bookcase, very fine quality. She raised an eyebrow significantly. Senor Colt has never cared about such things before. Despite her attempts to dismiss Rosa's teasing implications, Clara couldn't help the warmth that spread through her at this information. She had mentioned her love of books during their journey to town, lamenting the loss of her small collection in the stagecoach robbery. On Thursday, Clara met with Mayor Baldwin, a portly, energetic man with ambitious plans for Brownsville's development. Her credentials as a Boston-educated teacher with 5 years of experience at one of the city's most prestigious girls' schools immediately impressed him. "This is providential, Miss Vance," he declared, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "We've been without a proper teacher since spring. The children are falling behind, and several new families have moved to the area specifically for educational opportunities." He named a salary that, while modest by Boston standards, would be more than adequate given her lack of housing expenses. "When could you start?" he asked eagerly. "I would need a week or so to prepare the schoolhouse and develop a curriculum," Clara replied, already mentally cataloging the supplies she would need. "Done. The school board will meet on Tuesday evening to formally approve your appointment, but consider yourself hired. The schoolhouse is just 2 streets over from your property, a red brick building with a bell tower. Can't miss it." Clara left the mayor's office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Coming to Brownsville had been a leap of faith, but already it was proving to be the right decision. With a home of her own and meaningful employment, she could build the independent life she had dreamed of in Boston but never quite managed to achieve. On her way back from the mayor's office, Clara stopped at the general store to purchase some basic supplies. As she was examining a selection of lamps, she heard a familiar deep voice at the counter. "Just the usual, Mr. Hoffman, and I'll need some extra nails and roofing tar." Clara glanced up to see Colton standing at the counter, a list in his hand. He hadn't noticed her yet, focused on his transaction with the storekeeper. "Working on the Jensen place already, Colt?" Mr. Hoffman asked as he gathered the requested items. "Starting tomorrow. Roof needs patching before the fall rains come. Smart thinking. Heard you got a good price on it." Colton nodded. Fair enough. Jensen was motivated to sell. Mr. Hoffman began wrapping the purchases in brown paper. "Place needs a woman's touch, if you don't mind my saying. Bachelor like you could use a wife to make a proper home." Clara saw Colton's shoulders stiffen slightly. "Just need a roof that doesn't leak, Mr. Hoffman," the storekeeper chuckled. "For now, maybe, but a man doesn't buy land just to live alone on it forever." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Plenty of eligible ladies in town. Why, just yesterday, Miss Winters was in here singing your praises to our newest arrival." He nodded in Clara's direction. Colton turned, finally spotting her among the store's displays. Their eyes met, and Clara felt her cheeks grow warm at being caught eavesdropping, however unintentionally. "Miss Vance," he acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Layton." She moved closer to the counter, pretending great interest in a display of tinned goods. "How nice to see you again." Mr. Hoffman looked between them with undisguised interest. "You two know each other." "Mr. Layton was kind enough to assist me when I first arrived in the area," Clara explained, deliberately vague. "Is that so?" The storekeeper's eyebrows rose significantly. Well, Colton cleared his throat. "Miss Vance, if you're finished with your shopping, I'd be happy to carry your parcels home for you." Clara recognized the offer as an escape from Mr. Hoffman's prying, and she gratefully accepted. "That would be most kind. I just need to pay for these items." Once outside the store, packages in hand, Colton visibly relaxed. "Sorry about that. Hoffman's a decent fellow, but he gossips worse than any old woman." "No apology necessary. I appreciate the rescue." Clara smiled up at him as they began walking toward Cedar Street. "It seems to be becoming a habit of yours." A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. "Hardly the same as finding you collapsed on the trail. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." She glanced sideways at him. "I heard you purchased the Jensen property. Congratulations." "Thank you." "It's not much compared to your uncle's place, but it's mine. Been working toward owning my own land for a long time." "When do you take possession?" "Already have. Signed the papers yesterday." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "It's about 5 miles outside town." Good water, decent grazing land. Small house needs work, but the barn's solid. You must be excited to begin, he nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. Been dreaming of my own spread since I was a boy, finally making it happen. They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Clara spoke again. I've accepted a position as the town's schoolteacher. I start in just over a week. Colton looked genuinely pleased. That's excellent news. Town's been needing a proper teacher for months now. It feels right, Clara admitted, almost as if my uncle knew exactly what I would need when he left me his property. They reached her gate, and Colton hesitated before handing over her packages. Will you be at the social on Saturday? Clara nodded. Mrs. Abernathy insists it's the perfect opportunity to meet everyone, though I confess large gatherings have never been my forte. Nor mine, Colton admitted, but Mrs. Abernathy can be persuasive. Perhaps we reluctant socializers can provide moral support for one another, Clara suggested, immediately wondering if she had been too forward, but Colton's expression warmed. I'd like that, Miss Vance. Clara, she corrected impulsively. After all we've been through, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. He considered this for a moment, then nodded. Clara then, and I'm still just Colt. As he tipped his hat and turned to leave, Clara felt a curious lightness in her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. Saturday evening arrived with Clara feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The town social would be her first real introduction to the community where she now intended to make her life. Rosa had helped her prepare her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white lace trim that had somehow survived the stagecoach robbery relatively unscathed. With her chestnut hair arranged in a simple but elegant style and her mother's pearl earrings as her only adornment, Clara hoped she struck a balance between presentable and not overly formal. Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on escorting her to the social, which was being held in the church meeting hall. Can't have you walking in alone and being immediately swarmed by every unmarried man in the county, the older woman declared as they made their way down the twilit street. Surely you exaggerate, Clara protested, though she was secretly grateful for the companionship. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. Hardly. A pretty, educated young woman with her own property, you're practically catnip to the local bachelors, especially those looking to better their situations. The warning was gentle but clear, and Clara appreciated it. She had no illusions about the practical considerations that often drove frontier marriages. Her own parents' union had begun as just such an arrangement, though they had grown to care deeply for one another over the years. The church hall was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the assembled townsfolk. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while at the far end of the room, several men with fiddles and guitars were tuning their instruments in preparation for dancing later in the evening. Clara's entrance caused a noticeable stir, conversations pausing briefly as heads turned to observe the newcomer. Mrs. Abernathy, clearly anticipating this reaction, kept a firm hand on Clara's arm as she guided her through the crowd, making introductions at a pace that left Clara struggling to remember names and faces. You'll sort them all out eventually, Mrs. Abernathy assured her after the 15th introduction. Just smile and be yourself, they'll love you. Clara was beginning to feel overwhelmed when Mayor Baldwin appeared at her elbow, beaming broadly. Miss Vance, allow me to officially welcome you to our community. I've been telling everyone about our good fortune in securing such a qualified teacher. Before she could respond, he was already pulling her toward a group of well-dressed individuals. You must meet the school board members. They're all eager to make your acquaintance. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and conversations, with Clara doing her best to make a favorable impression on the people who would be overseeing her work at the school. She was conscious of being evaluated not just as a teacher, but as a woman, with many speculative glances and not so subtle questions about her background, family, and reasons for coming west alone. Throughout it all, she found her eyes repeatedly scanning the room, looking for Colton. As the evening wore on with no sign of him, She began to wonder if he had decided against attending after all. She was in the midst of a conversation with Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife who had been temporarily teaching at the school, when she felt a change in the atmosphere of the room. Glancing toward the entrance, she saw Colton had finally arrived. He stood somewhat awkwardly in the doorway, clearly not entirely comfortable with the social setting, but making the effort nonetheless. Like Clara, he had dressed for the occasion wearing a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be new trousers. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard to a cleaner line. Even from across the room, she could see he stood out among the townsfolk not because he was trying to, but because of an inherent quality that drew the eye. Their gazes met across the crowded hall, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Clara felt her heart give a peculiar little jump, which she immediately tried to dismiss as simple relief at seeing a familiar face. Mrs. Henderson, following Clara's line of sight, raised an eyebrow. "I see you've noticed our Mr. Layton. Quite the striking figure, isn't he? And newly a property owner, I hear." Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Abernathy reappeared at her side. "Come along, dear, you haven't tried the refreshments yet, and Mabel Patterson's apple cake is not to be missed." She lowered her voice to a whisper as they moved away. "Best to circulate. Don't want people talking about you focusing too much attention on any one person just yet." Clara nodded, understanding the wisdom of this advice even as she felt a twinge of disappointment. As a newcomer and the town's teacher, her behavior would be under constant scrutiny. She needed to be mindful of appearances. For the next half hour, she dutifully circulated, accepting a small plate of refreshments and making conversation with various townspeople. Everyone was welcoming, if curious, and Clara began to feel that she might indeed find a place for herself in this community. The musicians had begun playing, and several couples were already dancing when Clara found herself momentarily alone near one of the large windows that had been opened to allow the evening breeze to cool the hall. She was enjoying the relative quiet when a familiar voice spoke from just behind her. "Evening, Clara." She turned to find Colton standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat more at ease than when he'd first arrived. "Colt, I was beginning to think you might not come. Had some business to finish up at the property," he explained. "Didn't want to arrive looking like I'd just come from the barn." "You look very nice," Clara said before she could stop herself. Then, flustered, she added, "That is very presentable." A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "Thank you, you look very nice yourself." The simple compliment, delivered with such obvious sincerity, warmed her more than the most flowery praise might have done. "How are you finding the social?" he asked, glancing around at the crowded hall. "Everyone has been very welcoming," Clara replied. "Though I confess I'm finding it rather overwhelming to meet so many new people at once." Colton nodded, understanding. "Small towns can be like that. Everyone wants to know the newcomer's business, Mrs. Abernathy has been an excellent guide, warning me about potential suitors with ulterior motives," Clara said with a small smile. "Smart woman, Mrs. Abernathy," Colton replied, a strange note in his voice. "Property like yours would be tempting to plenty of men around here." Clara studied him for a moment. "Is that what you think of me, that I'm just property to be acquired?" "No," he said immediately, his gaze direct and unwavering. "That's not what I think at all." Something in his tone made Clara's pulse quicken. Before she could respond, however, Deputy Wilson appeared at her elbow. "Miss Vance, I've been looking all over for you." The young deputy's face was flushed with excitement. "They're starting a Virginia reel, and I was hoping you might favor me with the dance." Clara hesitated, glancing at Colton, who had taken a small step back at the deputy's arrival. "Don't let me keep you," he said quietly. "Enjoy your evening, Clara." Before she could protest, Deputy Wilson was already leading her toward the dance floor, chattering enthusiastically about how much he enjoyed dancing and how honored he was to partner with the town's new teacher. Throughout the dance, Clara found herself repeatedly looking for Colton among the onlookers, but he seemed to have disappeared. It wasn't until the third set of dances that she spotted him again, standing near the refreshment table deep in conversation with Mrs. Abernathy. Whatever they were discussing appeared serious, based on their expressions. Clara had just finished another dance, this time with Mr. Peterson from the boarding house, when Mrs. Abernathy approached her. "Having a good time, dear?" "Yes, thank you," Clara replied, somewhat breathlessly from the exertion of the dance. "Though I confess I'm not used to quite so much activity." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "You're making an excellent impression. The school board members are all singing your praises." She lowered her voice. "I saw you speaking with Colt earlier. He's not much for these gatherings usually." "So he mentioned," Clara said carefully, conscious of the older woman's shrewd gaze. Mrs. Abernathy studied her for a moment. "Well, he seems to have made an exception tonight. In fact, he asked if I thought it would be proper for him to request a dance with you." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that as long as you've danced with at least 3 other gentlemen first, which you now have, it would be entirely proper." Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. "One dance, mind you, any more would set tongues wagging." Before Clara could respond, the older woman had already moved away, making her way back toward Colton at the refreshment table. Clara watched as Mrs. Abernathy spoke to him, gesturing subtly in her direction. Colton's eyes found hers across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, he began making his way toward her. Clara smoothed her skirts nervously as he approached, suddenly feeling as anxious as she had before her first recital at finishing school. "Mrs. Abernathy tells me you've fulfilled your social obligations by dancing with the required number of partners," Colton said when he reached her, a hint of humor in his eyes. "So it seems," Clara replied, her own lips curving in response. "In that case, would you do me the honor of the next dance, Miss Vance?" He offered his hand, a formal gesture that somehow conveyed more meaning than the words themselves. "I would be delighted, Mr. Layton." Clara placed her hand in his, noting with a small thrill how completely it was enveloped by his larger one. The musicians were starting a waltz, a somewhat daring choice for a frontier town social, but evidently not uncommon in Brownsville. As Colton led her onto the floor and placed his hand respectfully at her waist, Clara became acutely aware of the interested glances being cast their way. "People are watching," she murmured as they began to move with the music. "Let them," Colton replied simply, his steady gaze never leaving her face. "It's just a dance." But it didn't feel like just a dance to Clara. There was something in the way Colton held her respectful, but with an underlying current of something more that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. He was an unexpectedly good dancer, guiding her smoothly around the floor with a natural grace that belied his rugged appearance. Clara, who had learned the formal dances as part of her Boston education, found herself following his lead effortlessly, as if they had danced together many times before. "You dance very well for a cowboy," she observed, immediately regretting the words as potentially insulting, but Colton merely smiled. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said no child of hers would embarrass her at social functions. She taught you well," she did, "in many things." His expression grew more thoughtful. "She would have liked you." The simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, touched Clara deeply. "Is she?" "Past 5 years ago, pneumonia." There was old grief in his voice, but no bitterness. "She was a remarkable woman. Came west with my father when there was nothing but wilderness. Built a life out of hard work and determination." "She sounds like someone I would have admired greatly," Clara said softly. Colton nodded, his eyes never leaving hers as they continued to move with the music. "You remind me of her in some ways, the same quiet strength." Coming from anyone else, Clara might have dismissed the words as mere flattery, but from Colton she recognized them as perhaps the highest compliment he could offer. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a great deal." They danced in silence for a few moments, a comfortable quiet that required no filling. Clara was conscious of the solid warmth of his hand at her waist, the gentle but firm guidance of his lead, and most of all, the unwavering attention in his gaze that made her feel as if they were the only 2 people in the room. As the music drew to a close, Colton slowed their movement gradually until they stood still among the other couples. For a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary, they remained in the dance position, neither quite ready to break the connection that had formed. Finally, Colton stepped back, releasing her waist but keeping gentle hold of her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Clara. The pleasure was mine," she replied, meaning it sincerely. He escorted her from the dance floor, aware of the curious glances following them. "Would you care for some refreshment?" Clara was about to accept when Mrs. Henderson approached, a determined expression on her face. "Miss Vance, I simply must introduce you to my nephew who's visiting from San Antonio. Such a promising young lawyer and so interested in education reform." With an apologetic glance at Colton, Clara found herself being led away to meet yet another potential suitor. When she finally had a moment to look for him again, Colton was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't until the social was drawing to a close that she spotted him near the door, apparently preparing to leave. Excusing herself from a conversation with the banker's wife, Clara made her way through the thinning crowd. "Are you leaving already?" she asked when she reached him. Colton nodded. "Early start tomorrow, moving some of my things out to the new property." "Of course." Clara hesitated, then added, "Thank you for the dance. It was a highlight of my evening." His expression softened, mine as well. He glanced around, noting that several people were watching their interaction with interest. "May I call on you sometime next week? I'd like to show you something." Clara felt a flutter of anticipation. "I would like that very much. Tuesday afternoon, around 2, that would be perfect." "The school board meeting isn't until the evening." Colton nodded, seeming pleased. "Until Tuesday, then." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Good night, Clara. Good night, Colt." She watched him leave, aware that her interest in the cowboy had not gone unnoticed by the town's observant residents. But for once, Clara found she didn't care what others might think. There was something happening between her and Colton Layton, something tentative and undefined, but undeniably real. With a small smile playing at her lips, she turned back to the social, ready to face the remainder of the evening's introductions with renewed energy. Tuesday afternoon found Clara watching the clock with uncharacteristic impatience. She had spent the morning at the schoolhouse, taking inventory of supplies and beginning to draft lesson plans for the various age groups she would be teaching. The work was satisfying but couldn't fully distract her from thoughts of Colton's impending visit. At precisely 2 o'clock, a knock sounded at her front door. Clara smoothed her skirts she had changed twice before settling on a simple but becoming green dress and went to answer it. Colton stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking slightly nervous but determined. "Afternoon, Clara." "Hello, Colt. Please come in." He shook his head. "Actually, I was hoping you might come with me. There's something I'd like to show you." Clara's curiosity was immediately piqued. "Of course. Let me just get my shawl." Outside, she found Colton had brought not only his own horse but a gentle-looking mare as well. "I borrowed Mrs. Abernathy's Daisy for you," he explained. "Thought you might prefer riding to being bounced around in a wagon." Clara approached the mare, stroking her velvety nose. "She's lovely. It's been some time since I've ridden properly, though." "Daisy's as steady as they come," Colton assured her, "and it's not too far." He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her into the side saddle. The brief contact sent a warmth through Clara that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. They rode at a leisurely pace, taking a road that led west out of town. Colton pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local history as they went, revealing a depth of knowledge about the area that impressed Clara. "How did you come to know so much about Brownsville?" she asked as they crossed a small wooden bridge over a creek. "Been here 8 years," he replied. "Like to know the land I live on, its history, its patterns." He glanced at her. "Your uncle was a good source of information. He knew more about this area than just about anyone." "You knew him well." Clara was eager for any personal insights into the uncle she'd never met. Colton nodded. "Did some work for him over the years, repairing fences, helping with larger projects around his property. He was a fair man, always had a story to tell while we worked." He smiled slightly. "Talked about you a lot. His niece, the teacher back east, he was mighty proud." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. I wish I had known him. We only had our letters. He understood why you couldn't visit, Colton said gently. Never held it against you, just hoped that someday you might come west and see the life he'd built. They rode in companionable silence for a while, Clara absorbing this new connection to her uncle. After about 30 minutes, they turned off the main road onto a narrower track that wound through a stand of oak trees before opening onto a rolling meadow. Here we are, Colton announced, reining his horse to a stop at the edge of the trees. The Jensen place, my place now. Clara took in the scene before her. A modest one-story house stood about 100 yards away, its wooden siding weathered but solid. A large barn and several smaller outbuildings were arranged nearby, and a corral held a few horses. A creek wound through the property, bordered by cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. In the distance, the land rose into gentle hills covered with grass that waved golden in the afternoon sun. It's beautiful, Clara said sincerely. I can see why you wanted it. Colton's expression warmed at her approval. It needs work, but the bones are good. Come, I'll show you around. He helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Clara found she didn't mind at all. The tour began with the barn, which was indeed in excellent condition, clean, well organized, and spacious. Jensen was a good horseman, Colton explained. Took better care of his barn than his house, truth be told. Next came the house itself, which was considerably more modest than Clara's inherited property, but had a sturdy, welcoming feel to it. The main room combined kitchen and living areas with a massive stone fireplace along one wall. 2 small bedrooms opened off the back, and a covered porch wrapped around 3 sides of the structure. As I said, it needs work, Colton admitted as they entered. Roof leaks in places, some of the window frames need replacing, and the whole place could use a good coat of whitewash. Clara could see the potential, however. With proper care and attention, the house could be quite comfortable. You've already started making improvements, she observed, noticing fresh lumber stacked neatly on the porch and new curtains hanging at the windows. Been working on it whenever I can spare the time, he acknowledged. Then, with a hint of hesitation, he added, there's something specific I wanted to show you, though. He led her to what appeared to be a recently built addition at the back of the house, a small room with large windows that let in abundant natural light. The space was empty except for a single piece of furniture that stood in the center, a bookcase. It was beautifully crafted of rich, dark wood, with intricate carvings along the top and sides. The shelves were adjustable, designed to accommodate books of various sizes, and a glass-fronted cabinet formed the lower portion. Colt, it's magnificent, Clara breathed, running her fingers over the polished surface. But I don't understand. He shifted uncomfortably, a rare uncertainty in his manner. When you mentioned losing your books in the stagecoach robbery, I remembered how my mother always said a house isn't a home without books. He gestured to the empty shelves. Thought you might need somewhere to put new ones when you get them. Clara stared at him in wonder, understanding dawning. You had this made, for me? Colton nodded, watching her reaction carefully. Too forward. No, she said quickly, her heart swelling with emotion. It's the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Relief crossed his features. Had old Mr. Carpenter make it. Best woodworker in the county. He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. I know it's not much, Clara. I'm not a wealthy man, but I wanted you to have something that would last, something that might remind you of me sometimes. The simple sincerity of his words touched Clara deeply. In Boston, she had received countless tokens from would-be suitors, flowers, confections, pretty trinkets meant to impress. None had ever moved her as this gift did. Colt, she said softly, stepping closer to him. No one has ever understood me so well after knowing me for such a short time. His eyes held hers, the usual reserve in them giving way to something warmer, more vulnerable. Don't feel like a short time, he admitted. Feel like I've known you much longer. Clara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. From that first moment when he had found her collapsed on the trail and promised to keep watch, something had connected them, something that defied rational explanation but felt undeniably right. I feel the same way, she whispered. For a long moment they stood close together in the quiet room, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then, with gentle deliberation, Colton reached out and took her hand in his. "Clara," he began, his voice low and serious, "I know this isn't proper courting. We've only just met and you're still settling into town, but I can't pretend I don't feel something when I'm with you, something I've never felt before." Clara's heart raced at his words, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I feel it too," she admitted. "And propriety seems rather irrelevant after everything we've been through together." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "True enough." His expression grew more serious again. "I'm not asking for any promises, just permission, I suppose, to call on you properly. To see if what we're feeling might grow into something more." Clara looked up at him, taking in the honest openness of his expression. In his eyes, she saw not just attraction but genuine respect and admiration, a recognition of her as a whole person, not merely a potential wife or the owner of desirable property. "I would like that very much," she said softly. His smile, then full and unreserved, transformed his normally serious face, creating crinkles around his eyes and revealing a small dimple in his right cheek that Clara had never noticed before. Impulsively, she reached up and touched his face, her fingertips lightly tracing the line of his jaw. Colton caught her hand in his, turning it slightly to place a gentle kiss against her palm, a gesture so intimate and yet so chaste that it made Clara's breath catch. "We should head back," he said reluctantly, though he didn't immediately release her hand. "People will talk if we're gone too long." Clara nodded, understanding the necessity but wishing they could remain in this moment a while longer. "Will you bring the bookcase to town tomorrow, if that suits you? Have to borrow Jensen's my wagon to transport it safely." "Tomorrow would be perfect," Clara replied. "I'll have Rosa prepare a proper dinner to thank you." As they rode back to town, Clara felt a new lightness in her heart. The future she had come west seeking was taking shape in ways she had never anticipated but now couldn't imagine otherwise. News of Colton's gift and his increasingly frequent calls at Clara's house spread quickly through Brownsville's active gossip network. Some, like Mrs. Abernathy, viewed the developing relationship with approval and satisfaction. Others, particularly those who had hoped to court Clara themselves, or who had daughters they considered suitable matches for the newly landed Cowboy, were less enthusiastic. Clara was conscious of the speculation, but found she cared less about it than she might have expected. Her days were full with preparations for the start of the school term, and her evenings were often spent in Colton's company, sometimes at her home for dinner with Rosa serving as chaperone, sometimes at church socials or community events, and occasionally on drives or rides in the countryside when weather permitted. Through it all, their connection deepened, built on shared values and mutual respect as much as the undeniable attraction between them. Clara discovered that beneath Colton's reserved exterior lay a thoughtful, intelligent man with a dry wit and a profound appreciation for the land he had chosen to make his home. For his part, Colton found in Clara a strength and independence that complemented his own, along with a gentle compassion that reminded him of the mother he had so admired. As September gave way to October, Clara threw herself into her teaching duties with characteristic dedication. The school in Brownsville had 16 pupils ranging in age from 6 to 16, with widely varying levels of previous education. The challenge of organizing appropriate lessons for each group might have overwhelmed a less experienced teacher, but Clara thrived on it. Colton made a point of visiting the schoolhouse one afternoon as classes were dismissing, bringing a load of firewood for the stove as the weather began to turn cooler. Clara found him stacking the logs neatly beside the building when she emerged after the last student had departed. "You didn't have to do that," she said, though she was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. He straightened, dusting off his hands. "Noticed your supply was getting low yesterday when I rode past. Thought I'd save you the trouble of ordering more from the lumberyard." Clara smiled, recognizing the practical care behind the action. It was so typical of Colton, not showy gestures or empty compliments, but useful assistance offered without fanfare. "Thank you. I appreciate it more than you know." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" I was about to review some of the children's work, but I could use a break. Colton nodded, following her into the one-room schoolhouse. Clara busied herself with the coffee pot that sat atop the small stove at the back of the room, while Colton moved among the student desks, examining the maps and educational charts hanging on the walls. "You've done wonders with this place," he commented. "Hardly recognize it from the last time I was in here." Clara glanced around at the orderly classroom with its polished desks arranged in neat rows, the freshly painted walls, and the well-stocked bookshelves. It just needed some attention. The children seemed to be responding well. "Hear nothing but good things about Miss Vance when I'm in town," she smiled, pleased by this report. "They're eager learners for the most part, even Tommy Wilson, though he does his best to hide it. The deputy's younger brother, heard he can be a handful." "He's testing boundaries," Clara said, bringing 2 cups of coffee to the teacher's desk and gesturing for Colton to take the chair beside it. "But there's a bright mind underneath the mischief. I've been giving him extra responsibilities, having him help the younger children with their letters. He pretends to hate it, but I can tell he's proud when they succeed." Colton's expression warmed as he listened to her talk about her students. "You're good at this, seeing what people need even when they don't know it themselves." "Teaching isn't so different from any other kind of caretaking," Clara replied. "It's about paying attention, really seeing the person in front of you." "Is that how you see me?" Colton asked, something vulnerable flashing briefly in his eyes. "Really see me?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "I try to. I see a man who values his independence but cares deeply for the community he's part of, who works hard and honors his commitments, who treats others with respect regardless of their station." She paused, then added softly, "I see someone I've come to care for very much." The admission hung in the air between them, more direct than either had been about their feelings before. Colton set his coffee cup down carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. "Clara," he began, his voice low and serious, "I'm not a man who finds words easily. But I need you to know that what I feel for you it's more than I ever expected to feel for anyone." He reached across the desk and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you make your place here in Brownsville, it's been the greatest joy of my life." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the simple honesty of his declaration. "Mine too," she whispered. For a long moment they sat in silence, hands joined across the desk, the late afternoon sun slanting through the schoolhouse windows to cast them in golden light. Then, with deliberate care, Colton stood and moved around to her side. Drawing her to her feet, he took both her hands in his. "I'm asking your permission to court you properly, Clara Vance," he said formally, "with honorable intentions." Clara smiled, her heart full to bursting. "You have it, Colton Layton," most enthusiastically. The smile that broke across his face then was like sunrise over the Texas plains, transformative and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle but unmistakably passionate. Clara responded in kind, her hands moving to his shoulders as she rose slightly on tiptoes to meet him. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the town social," he admitted. "I'm glad you waited until we were alone," Clara replied with a small laugh. "Mrs. Abernathy would have had a conniption if we'd scandalized the town." Colton chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "She's already planning our wedding if her hints are anything to go by." "Is she now?" Clara raised an eyebrow, though her heart skipped at the mention of marriage. "And how do you feel about that?" His expression grew serious again as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering against her cheek. "I think Mrs. Abernathy is a very perceptive woman." The implications of this statement sent a thrill through Clara, but before she could respond, the schoolhouse door swung open with a bang. "Miss Vance, I forgot my o." Young Tommy Wilson stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide at finding his teacher in what was clearly a private moment with the cowboy. Clara and Colton stepped apart quickly, though Colton kept one hand at the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Your arithmetic book is on your desk, Tommy," Clara said, maintaining her composure despite the flush she could feel rising in her cheeks. "Please remember to take all your materials home tomorrow." The boy nodded, darting to his desk to retrieve the forgotten book, then pausing on his way out to look back at them with a knowing smirk. "Wait till I tell Pa what I saw." "Tommy Wilson, you will do no such thing," Clara called after him, but the door was already swinging shut behind the boy's retreating figure. Colton gave a resigned sigh. "Well, that's one way to announce our intentions to the town." Clara couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of the situation. "I suppose propriety was always going to be a challenge, considering how we met." Colton's eyes crinkled with amusement. "True enough. Not many courtships begin with she collapsed from exhaustion on the trail." "And the cowboy made camp and said, 'Rest, I'll keep watch,'" Clara finished, smiling up at him. Not conventional, perhaps, but perfect in its own way. Colton drew her close again, his expression soft with affection. "I'll always keep watch for you, Clara, that's a promise." And as he sealed that promise with another kiss, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a new home in Brownsville, but something far more precious, a love as vast and enduring as the Texas sky itself. In the months that followed, Clara and Colton's courtship became the worst-kept secret in Brownsville. Tommy Wilson's excited report to his deputy brother had indeed spread through town with remarkable speed. Though most people claimed they had seen it coming from the moment, Colton had brought Clara to Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house that first day. For Clara, the fall and early winter passed in a happy blur of teaching, settling into her home, and spending time with Colton whenever their responsibilities allowed. She found unexpected joy in the rhythm of small-town life, the Sunday services followed by community dinners, the quilting circles where she gradually formed friendships with other women in town, and the simple pleasure of knowing her neighbors and being known by them in return. Colton divided his time between improvements on his own property and helping Clara with repairs and maintenance on hers. Under his guidance, she learned practical skills she'd never needed in Boston: how to chop firewood, mend a fence, and even basic horseback riding that didn't require a side saddle. In return, she shared her love of literature with him, reading aloud from her growing collection of books during quiet evenings by the fire. As Christmas approached, the town bustled with preparations for the holiday. The schoolchildren were rehearsing a pageant, stores displayed special imported goods, and homes were decorated with whatever greenery could be found in the winter landscape. One crisp December evening, Colton arrived at Clara's house with his wagon rather than on horseback, a mysterious air about him. "Bundle up warm," he instructed when she answered the door. "I want to show you something." Clara complied, intrigued, wrapping herself in her warmest shawl and the fur-lined cloak that had been a gift from Mrs. Abernathy. "Where are we going? You'll see." Colton helped her into the wagon, tucking a heavy blanket around her legs before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. They drove out of town as darkness fell, following the now familiar road toward Colton's property. But instead of turning at the usual spot, they continued on, taking a narrower track that wound up into the hills beyond. "I didn't know there was a road here," Clara remarked, peering into the gathering darkness. "Not much of one," Colton admitted. "More of a trail, really, but passable if you know the way." After about 20 minutes of careful driving, he reined the horses to a halt in a small clearing. "We'll walk from here." Taking her hand, he led her along a narrow path that climbed steadily upward through a stand of pine trees. Clara followed trustingly, curious but content to let the mystery unfold at Colton's pace. Finally, they emerged onto a flat promontory that overlooked the valley below. Clara gasped at the sight that greeted her. From this vantage point, they could see all of Brownsville spread out before them, its lights twinkling in the early evening darkness like earthbound stars. "It's beautiful," she breathed, moving to the edge to take in the panoramic view. Thought you might like it, Colton said, coming to stand beside her. Found this spot my first year in the area. Come up here sometimes to think or just to remember how far I've come. Clara glanced at him, touched by this sharing of something clearly personal to him. Thank you for bringing me here. He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small object. Got something else for you too, an early Christmas gift. Clara turned to face him fully, surprised. But I haven't, it's all right, he assured her. This couldn't wait for Christmas. He handed her a small, worn leather box. When she opened it, Clara found a simple but elegant gold ring inside, set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, Colton explained, his voice soft in the quiet night. My father gave it to her when he asked her to marry him, back in Missouri before they came west. She left it to me before she died, said to give it to the woman who made me feel the way my father made her feel. Clara looked up at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. Colt, he took her free hand in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. I know it hasn't been that long, Clara. Some might say we're rushing things, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Taking a deep breath, he continued, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I found you on that trail, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself. These past months have only confirmed what my heart already knew, that you're the woman I want to share my life with. Tears of joy were streaming down Clara's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away, not wanting to release his hand. Clara Vance, Colton said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she whispered, then more firmly, yes, Colton Layton, with all my heart, yes. His face broke into that rare, full smile that she had come to treasure, and he took the ring from the box, sliding it carefully onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. It's beautiful, Clara said, admiring the way the pearl caught the moonlight. A beautiful ring for a beautiful woman, Colton replied, drawing her into his arms. My mother would have loved you, Clara, almost as much as I do. Their kiss then was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, Colt, she said softly, more than I ever thought possible. He held her close, his chin resting atop her head. We have a lot to figure out, he acknowledged, where we'll live, how to combine our properties. Clara looked up at him. I've been thinking about that. What if we kept both places? My house in town is ideal for when I need to be at the school, especially during bad weather. And your land is perfect for the ranch you've dreamed of building. Colton considered this, nodding slowly. Could work. It's not too far between them, and eventually, once the ranch is more established. He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. Once the ranch is established, Clara prompted gently. Well, I thought maybe we'd want a proper family home out there, something we build together with room for children if we're blessed that way. The image his words conjured a home they created together, filled with the laughter of their children, made Clara's heart swell with joy. I'd like that very much, she said softly. A home that's truly ours, built on land that you love. Colton's arms tightened around her, and she could feel the slight tremor that ran through him at her words. You really are remarkable, Clara Vance. Most women would insist on living in town with all its conveniences. I'm not most women, she reminded him with a smile. And convenience isn't everything. I've come to love this land too, Colt, to understand what it means to you. I want us to build our future here together. They stood for a while longer on the promontory, discussing their plans and dreams for the future. Finally, as the night air grew colder, they reluctantly made their way back to the wagon for the return journey to town. When should we tell people? Clara asked as they drove, nestled close together under the blanket. Though I suspect Mrs. Abernathy will take one look at us and know immediately. Colton chuckled. That woman doesn't miss much, but I thought we might announce it properly at the Christmas social next week if that suits you. It's perfect, Clara agreed, though I should probably write to my aunt in Boston first. She's my only remaining family, and while we're not particularly close, she should hear it from me rather than in a letter from a well-meaning acquaintance. Colton nodded his understanding. Family should come first, even distant family. When they reached Clara's house, he walked her to the door, both of them reluctant for the evening to end. Standing on the porch, Clara held up her hand, admiring the way her ring caught the light from the windows. "It still doesn't seem quite real," she admitted. Colton took her face gently between his hands. "It's real, Clara, as real as anything in this world." He kissed her again, a lingering kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When he finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers for a moment. "I should go before Rosa comes looking for you with that broom of hers." Clara laughed softly. "She's become quite protective. As she should be, your precious cargo." He placed one last kiss on her forehead. "Sleep well, my love, I'll see you tomorrow." As Clara watched him drive away, her heart full to bursting, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short months. From the desperate woman collapsing on the trail to the happily engaged schoolteacher with roots growing deeper in Brownsville with each passing day, it was more than she could have ever hoped for when she set out from Boston. Inside, Rosa took one look at her face and exclaimed, "Dios mío." "He has asked you, hasn't he?" Clara laughed, not even bothering to deny it as she held out her hand to show the ring. "Is it that obvious? Only to anyone with eyes, Miss Clara," Rosa replied with a broad smile. "You are glowing like the sun itself." She hugged Clara impulsively. "I am so happy for you. Señor Colt is a good man." "The best man," Clara agreed. "Though how we're going to manage two properties, I'm not entirely sure." "You will find a way," Rosa said confidently. "Love always does." The Christmas social at the church hall was even more festive than the town gathering Clara had attended when she first arrived in Brownsville. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated the walls, candles glowed in every window, and a large tree stood in one corner, adorned with handmade ornaments contributed by the schoolchildren. Clara and Colton arrived together, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, the pearl ring gleaming on her finger. They had agreed to wait for a natural moment to make their announcement, though Clara suspected that the sharp-eyed women of the town had already noticed her new jewelry. Sure enough, they had barely removed their coats when Mrs. Abernathy descended upon them, her gaze immediately going to Clara's left hand. "Well," she exclaimed, beaming broadly, "it's about time, come here, both of you." She enveloped first Clara, then a somewhat startled Colton in enthusiastic hugs. "I couldn't be happier if you were my own children." "We were planning to announce it officially tonight," Colton explained, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Oh, don't worry about that." "I haven't said a word to anyone," Mrs. Abernathy assured them, though her expression suggested she might burst if she had to keep the secret much longer. Though I did notice that Mrs. Henderson was eyeing Clara's hand rather suspiciously during choir practice yesterday. The news spread quickly through the gathering, with friends and neighbors coming to offer congratulations. Mayor Baldwin was particularly effusive, pumping Colton's hand and assuring Clara that her position at the school would always be secure. "Married or not, we're not like those stuffy Eastern schools with their ridiculous rules about female teachers." As the evening progressed, the town's fondness for both Clara and Colton became increasingly evident. Sheriff Morgan raised a toast to the engaged couple, his gruff voice softening as he spoke of how Edmund Vance would have approved of the match. Even Deputy Wilson, who had harbored his own hopes regarding Clara, offered sincere good wishes. "You're a lucky man, Layton," he said, shaking Colton's hand. "Don't you forget it." "Never will," Colton assured him, his arm slipping protectively around Clara's waist. Later, as the musicians played and couples took to the dance floor, Clara and Colton found a moment of relative privacy near the refreshment table. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Completely," she assured him, reaching up to straighten his tie. "Though I confess I didn't expect quite so much. Enthusiasm from everyone," Colton chuckled. "Small towns, everyone feels they have a stake in each other's happiness." He glanced around at the festive gathering. "It's not such a bad thing when you think about it." Clara followed his gaze, taking in the familiar faces of the people who had so quickly become her community. "No, it's not bad at all. It's rather wonderful, actually, to be part of something larger than oneself. Colton nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's what I felt when I first came to Brownsville, like I could put down roots here, build something lasting. And now we'll build it together, Clara said softly. His expression warmed, and he leaned down to place a gentle kiss on her forehead, heedless of the knowing smiles their public display of affection elicited from nearby onlookers. Together, he agreed. Always. Spring came to the Texas borderlands in a riot of wildflowers, painting the previously brown landscape in vibrant blues, reds, and yellows. For Clara and Colton, the months since their engagement had been filled with preparations not just for their upcoming wedding in May, but for the life they would build afterward. Colton had made significant improvements to his property, repairing and expanding the house with help from several of the town's men who offered their labor in the spirit of community that Clara had come to cherish about Brownsville. The small room that had housed her bookcase was now a proper study, with large windows and built-in shelves lining the walls. Clara, for her part, had completed her first full term as the town's schoolteacher with considerable success. Even Tommy Wilson, her most challenging student, had shown remarkable improvement under her guidance, recently announcing his intention to maybe become a teacher someday if ranching doesn't work out. As the wedding day approached, Clara found herself increasingly divided between excitement for her future with Colton and a wistful sadness that neither of her parents would be present to see her marry. In these moments, she was particularly grateful for Mrs. Abernathy, who had stepped naturally into a maternal role, helping with wedding preparations and offering the kind of practical advice and emotional support that Clara might have received from her own mother. 2 weeks before the wedding, Clara was surprised by the arrival of a stagecoach from San Antonio carrying an unexpected visitor, her Aunt Harriet from Boston. Responding to the wedding invitation Clara had sent with little hope that her rather formal relative would undertake such a journey. "I could hardly allow my only niece to marry without family present," Aunt Harriet declared as she descended from the stagecoach, looking remarkably composed despite the long and undoubtedly uncomfortable journey. "Though I must say, Clara, your letters hardly prepared me for the rustic nature of your new home." Clara, delighted despite her aunt's thinly veiled disapproval, embraced the older woman warmly. "I'm so glad you've come, Aunt Harriet. I can't wait for you to meet Colton." "Yes, well, I shall certainly reserve judgment until I've had the opportunity to assess this cowboy who has somehow managed to secure your affections." Aunt Harriet sniffed, though there was a glint of curiosity in her eyes. "Your mother would expect no less of me." Colton, to his credit, approached meeting Clara's formidable aunt with the same quiet confidence he brought to every challenge. He arrived for dinner that evening freshly shaved and wearing his best clothes, his manner respectful but not deferential as he answered Aunt Harriet's rather pointed questions about his background, prospects, and intentions toward her niece. "And you believe you can provide adequately for Clara?" Aunt Harriet asked bluntly over the dessert course. "She was raised in certain comforts, you understand." "I understand, madam," Colton replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "I may not be wealthy by Boston standards, but between my ranch and Clara's property here in town, we'll want for nothing important. I promise you that your niece will never regret choosing this life." Aunt Harriet studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Well, at least you're honest. Better than some of those simpering Boston boys with their empty flattery and equally empty pockets." She turned to Clara. "He'll do, I suppose, though I still think you're mad to bury yourself out here in this wilderness when you could have had your pick of suitors back home." Clara exchanged an amused glance with Colton. "I've found exactly what I was looking for, Aunt Harriet, even if I didn't know I was looking for it." To everyone's surprise, Aunt Harriet not only stayed for the full 2 weeks leading up to the wedding, but threw herself into the preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. She and Mrs. Abernathy, after an initial period of mutual wariness, discovered a shared passion for organization, and soon formed an efficient partnership that had the entire town jumping to execute their wedding-related directives. Never thought I'd see the day when a Boston society matron and our Mrs. Abernathy would be thick as thieves, Sheriff Morgan remarked to Colton as they watched the two women overseeing the decoration of the church. Remarkable what a wedding can do. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with just enough breeze to temper the May sunshine. Clara stood in her bedroom, gazing at her reflection in the mirror as Rosa and Aunt Harriet made final adjustments to her dress, a creation of ivory silk that Aunt Harriet had insisted on ordering from San Antonio, declaring that no niece of mine will be married in calico, frontier or not. "You look beautiful, Querida," Rosa said, tears in her eyes as she carefully arranged the veil. "Like an angel." "Indeed," Aunt Harriet agreed, her usual briskness softened by genuine emotion. "Your mother would be so proud, Clara." Clara blinked back tears of her own, unwilling to ruin the careful work Rosa had done on her appearance. "Thank you both, for everything." A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Mrs. Abernathy, who would be escorting Clara to the church in lieu of a father. "It's time, dear," she announced, her eyes widening as she took in Clara's appearance. "Oh my, Colton won't know what hit him." The church was filled to capacity with what seemed like the entire population of Brownsville and the surrounding area. As Clara stood at the entrance, her arm linked with Mrs. Abernathy's, she felt a momentary flutter of nerves. Then the doors opened, the assembled guests rose to their feet, and she saw Colton waiting for her at the altar. He was handsome in his new suit, his normally unruly hair neatly combed, but it was the expression on his face as he watched her walk toward him that Clara knew she would remember for the rest of her life, a look of such pure joy and wonder that it banished any last-minute doubts she might have harbored. When she reached him and Mrs. Abernathy placed her hand in his, Colton squeezed it gently, leaning close to whisper, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony itself was traditional but personal, with Reverend Henderson incorporating references to their unusual first meeting that drew appreciative chuckles from the congregation. When it came time for their vows, Clara and Colton had each written their own, a somewhat unconventional choice that reflected their desire to start their marriage as they meant to go on with honesty, openness, and a deep respect for each other's voice. "Clara," Colton began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Before I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted from life, a piece of land to call my own, honest work that left me tired at the end of the day, and maybe some measure of respect from my neighbors. You've shown me that I was aiming too low." He took both her hands in his. "You've brought light and learning and laughter into my world. You've challenged me to be better than I was, and you've loved me exactly as I am. I promise to spend every day of our life together trying to be worthy of that love, to protect you, to support you, to cherish you through whatever joys and sorrows life brings our way." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she responded, "Colton, you came into my life when I was at my most vulnerable, and you offered strength without demanding weakness in return. You truly saw me at a time when I wasn't sure anyone ever would." She squeezed his hands gently. "You've taught me that real strength often comes quietly, in simple promises kept and in steady hands that build rather than take. I promise to be your partner in all things, to respect your dreams as you have respected mine, to stand beside you through good harvests and bad, and to never take for granted the miracle that brought us together on that dusty trail." There was hardly a dry eye in the church as they exchanged rings, a simple gold band for Clara to accompany her pearl engagement ring, and a matching one for Colton that he had insisted on, saying, "If I'm lucky enough to be your husband, I want the whole world to know it." When Reverend Henderson pronounced them husband and wife, Colton's kiss was both tender and possessive, a perfect expression of the man she had come to love so deeply. The congregation's applause seemed to go on forever, a joyful affirmation of the community's blessing on their union. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables set up under the oak trees and lanterns strung from the branches to prepare for when darkness fell. Everyone had contributed something: food, decorations, music turning the wedding feast into a true community celebration. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Clara found moments to observe her new husband as he moved among their guests, accepting congratulations with characteristic quiet dignity, but also showing a warmth and ease that she knew came from genuine happiness. Watching him laugh at something Sheriff Morgan said, his head thrown back and his entire face transformed by joy, Clara felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Later, as the stars began to appear in the darkening Texas sky, Colton found her sitting with Aunt Harriet and Mrs. Abernathy, the older women deep in conversation about the differences between Boston and Brownsville society. "May I steal my wife for a dance?" he asked, offering his hand to Clara with a smile that was for her alone. "You may indeed," Aunt Harriet replied with unexpected warmth, "though I expect you to bring her back eventually. We're discussing plans for the school's expansion, and Clara's input is essential." Colton led Clara to the area cleared for dancing, where other couples were already moving to the music provided by the town's amateur but enthusiastic band. As he took her in his arms, he murmured, "Your aunt seems to be warming to Brownsville." Clara laughed softly. "I think she's even warming to you, which is the greater miracle. She actually called you a fine young man with excellent prospects this afternoon." "High praise indeed." Colton's expression grew more serious as he gazed down at her. "Are you happy, Mrs. Layton?" The new name sent a thrill through Clara. "Completely, Mr. Layton, are you? More than I ever thought possible." He guided her in a slow turn, his hand warm and secure at her waist. "Still can't quite believe you're mine." "Believe it," Clara said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm exactly where I want to be." As they continued to dance under the Texas stars, surrounded by the community that had embraced them both, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate woman collapsing on the trail to the beloved wife dancing in her husband's arms, it had been a transformation beyond anything she could have imagined when she first set out from Boston. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness from a stranger, a cowboy who had made camp and said, "Rest. I'll keep watch." Little had either of them known then that those words would be the beginning of a lifetime of watching over each other, of building a love as enduring as the land itself. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of the home she and Colton had built together on his property, watching as her husband taught their 4-year-old son, Edmund, how to groom a gentle pony. The boy's dark hair, so like his father's, ruffled in the breeze as he concentrated intently on the task, his little face serious with responsibility. From the cradle beside her, 2-month-old Catherine made a soft sound, and Clara looked down to see her daughter's eyes the same clear green as her own blinking up at her sleepily. Smiling, she lifted the baby, cradling her close as she continued to observe her husband and son. The ranch had prospered under Colton's careful stewardship, growing from the modest property he had purchased just before their marriage into one of the most respected small spreads in the area. They still maintained Clara's house in town, using it during the school year when she needed to be close to her teaching duties. But this place, this land that Colton had dreamed of for so long, had become the true heart of their family life. Clara herself had flourished as well, continuing her role as Brownsville's schoolteacher while also embracing her life as a rancher's wife with an enthusiasm that sometimes still surprised her. She had learned to ride properly, to help with calving, to grow a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county, and even to shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy, a skill Colton had insisted she master, just in case. Their marriage had deepened with each passing year, the initial attraction and mutual respect evolving into a partnership so complete that Clara sometimes found it difficult to remember her life before Colton. They had weathered challenges together, a drought that threatened the ranch's survival, a bout of scarlet fever that had swept through the town claiming several lives, the difficult birth of their daughter that had left both mother and child hanging precariously between life and death for several terrifying hours. Through it all, They had kept the promise they made to each other on their wedding day to face whatever came as true partners, drawing strength from each other and from the community they had both come to cherish. As if sensing her thoughts, Colton looked up from his lesson with Edmund, his eyes finding hers across the yard. Even now, after 5 years of marriage, that gaze could still make her heart skip a beat. He said something to their son, then crossed to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time to join his wife and daughter. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her thoughtful expression as he bent to place a gentle kiss on Catherine's downy head. "Perfect," Clara assured him, leaning into his side as his arm came around her shoulders. "I was just thinking about how fortunate we are, how full our life is." Colton nodded, his gaze taking in their son, now carefully brushing the pony's mane, the thriving ranch spread out before them, and the baby girl nestled in Clara's arms. "We've been blessed beyond measure," he agreed. "Though I still maintain the greatest blessing was finding you on that trail." "Even though I was half dead from heat exhaustion," Clara teased, a familiar exchange between them. "Especially then," Colton replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Gave me the chance to be your hero right from the start," Clara laughed softly. "You're still my hero, Colt, every day." He pulled her closer, careful not to disturb the baby. "And you're still the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. Brownsville's finest teacher, the best mother our children could ask for, and a rancher's wife who can outwork men half my age." "Flatterer," Clara accused lightly, though she was warmed by his praise. "Just the truth," Colton insisted. Then, with a hint of mischief in his eyes, he added, "Though I am particularly fond of how you look in those riding trousers Rosa made for you. Colton Layton." Clara exclaimed in mock scandal, glancing down to make sure Catherine hadn't somehow understood her father's improper remark. Colton's low chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Just admiring my wife, Mrs. Layton. Nothing wrong with that." His expression grew more serious. 5 years today, you know. "Since you agreed to marry me up on that ridge," Clara nodded, touched that he remembered the anniversary of their engagement. "Best decision I ever made. Mine, too." He gazed out over the land that had become their home, his expression contented. "Never thought I could be this happy, Clara. Never even knew to dream this big." Clara followed his gaze, taking in the scene before them, the land green and thriving in the spring sunshine, their son now chattering happily to his pony, the future stretching out before them full of possibility and promise. "We built something good here, didn't we?" she said softly. Colton's arm tightened around her shoulders, and when he spoke, his voice held all the quiet certainty that had first drawn her to him all those years ago on the trail. "The best thing, Clara, and we're just getting started." As if in agreement, little Catherine cooed softly in her mother's arms, her tiny hand reaching up to grasp her father's finger. Clara watched as Colton's expression softened at this simple contact, his entire being focused on the tiny life they had created together. This, she thought, was the true meaning of home, not just a place, but the people who filled it with love, who watched over each other through the darkness and celebrated together in the light. From that first moment on the trail when she had collapsed from exhaustion, and a kind stranger had made camp and promised to keep watch, Clara and Colton had been building this life together, one day at a time. And as the Texas sun continued its arc across the sky, bathing them all in its golden light, Clara knew with absolute certainty that they would continue to build and grow and love for all the days to come. The schoolteacher from Boston and the cowboy who had taught her the true meaning of strength, partnership, and enduring love.